I was fortunate in that I got accepted at a lot of schools. But Keeney at the time, Brad Keeney, was the director of the program at Texas Tech.
Okay.
And so I got accepted to go to Tech and went, and that was fortuitous because Ray Beckvar and his wife Dorothy Beckvar were both faculty members there at the time. And Dorothy happened to have a relationship with Richard Fish at MRI.
Okay.
And she knew my passion for Jackson's work, and so she gave me his phone number. And I called Fish up, and he said, come out to visit us, and I went there. And went there for some training. We were, Pedro, you and I were talking about your first experience with Weekland and Fish.
Yes.
That was mine. I went and they were doing a training seminar. And so at night, John gave me the key to the basement. And I would go down in the basement and spend, from the time that the training ended to the next morning, literally, going through boxes and pulling out old audio recordings. Generally speaking, they can't see across. There were boxes and boxes, or there was a particular box, actually. I was so interested in Jackson. These are open-face reel-to-reel recordings. And so I went into the box, and John loaned me, still here it is today, an old wallet sack player. This is the one that they would use, one of the ones they used in the Bateson team.
Okay.
And they still had them down, and so John loaned me this, and I would sit up at night and listen to these recordings, and I was in heaven.
Yeah.
going through papers, etc. And at one point, John says, this was about 1987-ish, John said, well, you know, you should start an archive. And I said,
John says?
Yeah, this is his idea. This whole archive is a product of John Weekland. And I said, okay, not having any idea that would really be such a shaping event in my career. So I started working at constructing an archive for MRI. I became a research associate then. And then in 1990, when I became a faculty member here at ULM, the archive was a joint project of the MRI and the ULM Marriage and Family Therapy Program. And here we are today.
Okay. Well, Manu, can you tell us about the mission of the archive, please?
And so the archive was developed for that purpose, was to preserve the work of Don Jackson. That quickly became the work of the Palo Alto group, going back into the Gregory Bateson's research projects, of which Jackson was one of the central members of that group, included Jay Haley and John Weekland and William Fry, in addition to Bateson. And so the archive initial and ongoing primary purpose is to preserve the materials from their research. As that has gone on, collections have expanded. In addition to Don Jackson's work, which is central, it's like the heartbeat of the archive. There's a large collection of materials from the Gregory Bateson research projects that John Weekland placed in our care, that includes audio recordings of interviews done with patients during that era from 51 to 52 to 61, of transcripts and a few audio recordings of the Bateson team meetings. Those kinds of artifacts are in that collection. There's a collection of the early MRI era from about October of '58, when MRI was founded, through about '68 when Don Jackson died. I consider that the first or second set of data, which is, again, it was the creation of the first family therapy training in the world that was federally funded by the United States anyway, the government. was found. And in the third era is the creation of the Palo Alto, of the MRI Brief Therapy Center, beginning about 1965, 66. And that's the work that the MRI is most known for, actually, because of the passage of time, really. The work of John Weekland and Paul Watzlawick and Richard Fish. Thousands of hours of the actual therapy that was conducted in the first decade of that research project are here and preserved, and many of their essentially all of their published works of the people that are members of that group are here in the archive. And over time, the archive has continued to expand. In about 2007 or 6, Nora Bateson elected to move from the Gregory Bateson archive in University of California, Santa Cruz. She took the films that Bateson made during his research on families in the 50s and transferred them all here. So that the purpose of the archive is to preserve and to promulgate or make people aware that these materials are still in existence and they can be studied, and people can come here and study them. One of the aspects of this archive that we take very seriously, I take very seriously, is the families of these original thinkers actually own everything in this archive, and we are the curator of it. So when we do projects that involve Paul Watzlawick's work, for example, or Gregory Bateson, or Jackson, or whomever, Weekland,
You consult with the families.
you absolutely consult with the family, and I make them aware of this is what we're about to do, and with your permission. And they, generally speaking, they say absolutely, they're delighted, but it is so that we are just the holder of these materials, and we're very deferential to the families of the creators of this work.
Okay. Well, can you tell us about the Bateson era collection, the Tim Bateson?
Yes, the world owes a debt to John Weekland. John Weekland was the co-director of the Gregory Bateson research projects. Obviously, Bateson was the director of the projects, and the surviving materials from that series of 4 research projects over a decade primarily exist because John Weekland preserved them and had them in his office, actually, and so they in turn were by John placed in the archive. There are other smaller collections. For instance, Jay Haley has some materials from the Bateson research projects.
Now with his wife?
They're now in Stanford University. They're
Oh,
a
yeah?
special collection at Stanford University's library. But they were in Jay's possession for the longest time. Madeleine Richport Haley placed them in the library at Stanford. So there's smaller collections, but the bulk of the materials that exist that survived, there's not even materials from it largely in the Bateson archive. There are many things in the Bateson archive it's an invaluable archive, but absent is the materials from that 10 years of research as part of the Bateson research projects. And I suspect that's because John was placed in a given responsibility to hold on to the materials, and in turn, that's a very fortuitous thing because they are now in the Jackson archive. And what are they that I'm referring to? They're the surviving audio recordings on open space, 1/4-inch tape, videotape, audio tape. and several thousand hours of these materials from not only the Bateson Research Project, but then later the first 10 years of the Brief Therapy Center's work, and all of the work from Don Jackson and Virginia Satir and others during the first decade of the MRI's work before the Brief Therapy Center. Most of the audio recordings are in that format, and those materials are housed here, and over time we would find open-face players that could then play the machine, play the sound. We would digitize it, or we'd place it into the current format. And for a decade or two, as you will remember, the state of the art was cassettes.
Yes.
So the first transfer of all of these materials that I made was onto cassettes, not knowing that that technology would again change, and what happened next? CDs, right? So CDs, we were told for a decade or two, this was going to be the next format. So all these materials were transferred from audio cassettes to CDs, only to have those replaced by DVDs, the red box, only to be replaced by digitization into databases. And now, thank God, I think when we digitize, we have formats that are digital formats that are now in the large computer. So it's been a series of duplications to more modern formats, and traveling all over anywhere that happened to have a pawn shop that you could purchase a reel-to-reel recorder.
Yeah. Tell us about the beginning, because at the beginning you have found this archive, the old reels, like this one, and you don't have the machines to play.
You didn't. You had to go looking for them. And so this happens to be one of the ones from the probably from the Bateson era, where they had, you can see photographs like this photograph of the Bateson research team, and you notice that the recording machine where they're playing a tape on is this same machine. Well, John placed in the archive 2 of these original Wallensack open-face reel-to-reel recorders. This is a portable machine.
Yes.
Only weighs 30 pounds or so. But you could carry it into a room with a microphone. There's a microphone, and they would do the interviews with clients, or when the team would meet and talk, they were recorded on these kinds of machines. And so over time, you have to find open-face reel-to-reel players and recorders, so as to be able to gain access to these artifacts, these documents.
We have as a broader collection recordings of the Bateson team.
Yes, it's the recordings. What the Bateson team, Bateson and his team were based in the first floor of a building that was on the Menlo Park Veterans Administration Hospital. The team would get together once a week on Wednesdays, to talk about whatever they were going to be discussing or doing in the week, in their studies. And they were studying a wide range of communication. Anywhere where people were interacting with one another, that's a domain of communication. So they had a broad conception of what should be looked at. Once a week on Wednesdays they'd get together and they would record those meetings. So when we talk about the Bateson team conferences, that's what we're referring to, the weekly meetings. And generally speaking, what they would do is they would record them, and then the secretary would transcribe the recording and make a and so we have those transcripts. There's 118 transcripts of those interactions of Bates and Haley Weekland,
William Fry was there?
Jackson and Bateson, Jackson, Haley, Weekland, and Fry was there a good part of the time, but he went off into the Navy for 2 years, so he got pulled back in the Navy, so he was absent for 2 years. This is the meeting of the Gregory Bateson Research Projects team from June 22nd, 1955, in which they're talking about this is the first meeting of the team after they had returned from their first visit with Milton Erickson. So it's an extraordinary artifact. It's an extraordinary interaction. And I've mentioned this to you. They were interested in getting Erickson's thoughts about what they thought they were seeing in the interactions that they were having take place in front of them in the families of hospitalized patients.
If we didn't have anything special on the program today, there's about 15 minutes of his analysis of a document, which might be worth hearing here today.
Leave it up to you. I think it's quite appropriate we should listen to something of his today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to. Well, remember, you used to talk about making a list when we listen to a patient and such.
Yeah.
Well, he does a kind of a structural analysis of a patient's verbatim comments. What he used to do was send the secretary up to a new patient and have her say something to him to get him started talking. And then the guy would talk and she'd take it on shorthand, bring it down to Erickson, type it up, and he would look at it and make a diagnosis without ever seeing the patient, hearing his voice, just from the way he put words together. And he gives us an analysis of why he decided this particular patient had this particular diagnosis. And he goes over each line of it there for a few minutes. It might be worth hearing.
That would be very
And this first 2 pages down to the end of that paragraph, it's here, is what he makes the diagnosis on.
boy, oh boy, this gal is crazy, the bed bug. Beautiful stuff. This is a schizomanic, or a manic schizophrenic. Because there's some lovely little humorous barbs. How would we have caught him? How did you tell it was a manic depression? The positive and negative. The black and white.
Well, he says the positive and negative, the reducing everything down to a specific, and the use of stereotypes.
Yeah, and there's some clangs in there. Well, they're not really clangs, but they're more like assonance or alliterative kind of stuff. He was white as a lily, and his hair was black as the raven. His head ground post as the raven of the night. I don't know what you call that, if there is a name for it, where you pick out a word and then use the word in the next context.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's that kind of thing. You take the word and use it in a different context in the next sentence, but the same word. I don't know if there's a name for it. She does that several times, but there is a clang in here. Well, no, that isn't clanging either. Small town gossip.
That's almost.
It's certainly a type problem.
What problem?
A logical type problem. When they can't say this is a room, they have to say that is a table, that is a chair, that is a pair of socks.
Yeah, there's a size of Gestalt problem.
It's a classification problem.
Well, now the whole of information theory is based on the, quote, negative idea that the amount of information in a message is measurable in terms of the number of alternatives which are excluded by that message. The bit is the unit of information, and a bit of information is a piece of information which asserts a yes or a no, and therefore excludes the other. You know this sort.
Yeah.
If you gave her 20 questions, what you have is 20 bits, and in 20 bits, by properly dissecting the universe, you can identify one of a million objects. Now we should say the manic depressive is a person who operates on that theory in some way.
Yeah, but they don't move between the levels the way you do in 20 questions. You have to cover an enormous range. Only if you start with big divisions
why you have your hair color. There are reasons why I have a receding hairline. There are reasons why I I prefer certain foods that I eat. And a main one is, this is what I've inherited from my family. The ways of the people that, according to Harry Sullivan, acculturated me, right? And the givers of culture, he didn't talk about parents, Sullivan. He talked about the givers of culture. This archive preserves your heritage. If you are a brief therapist, if you are someone who is following any number of the methods of family therapy that are products of the early work at the Palo Alto group, then this is as though you were going home to visit great-great-grandpa and great-great-grandma and your uncles and your aunts, all of whom contributed things that today we take for granted. There are reasons why you do or do not ask certain questions at the beginning of an interview. There are reasons behind most of the behavior that one is trained in doing therapy. And those reasons are found here in the work of the preceding generations. That's the purpose of the archive. That's the reason why people out there in the world who are doing therapy would benefit from knowing that if they want to study either a particularly effective aspect of what they're doing, or the reasons why they've desisted from doing certain behaviors in their therapy, and they're curious to know where that came from, well, they can come here. We have multiples of collections from the people that from whom we have learned our ways.
How can we have access to this beautiful work?
Fantastic. Good question. The easiest way to gain access is to come visit us.
Yeah.
We are open 12 months a year. I or graduate assistants are here in the archive to welcome people. We have housing on campus that people can stay in at very inexpensively. But as far as access to it, contact us. We have a email address. We have a telephone numbers. We have a web page address, and contact us, and we could set up a meeting. We've had visitors literally from all over the world who have come here for the purpose of studying the materials in the archive.
Okay. Thank you.
So,